There's a scene that silently repeats itself in crowded cafes, on the warm couches of living rooms, and in endless traffic lines. Faces lit by the pale glow of a screen, fingers scrolling in an almost automatic motion, and a sigh that blends fatigue with apathy. That's when Colin Wilson's sharp realization cuts through the air. This is one of the most urgent problems for civilized man. He built civilization to give himself security. Security? For what? For boredom? Most human beings need a certain degree of challenge, of external stimulation, to keep from sinking into the vacant stare and empty consciousness of an idiot. Those words ring like an awakening bell, reminding us that what we call comfort may be the prelude to a greater void. Let's travel then to a small industrial town in Victorian England, where our great-grandparents, still teenagers, worked clattering looms 6 days a week. They knew the true weight of fatigue. They left before the sun rose, returned when the moon already hung over the rooftops, wishing only for a real Sunday off. Rest in those days was a mirage. Then the steam engine spread. Production soared. Factory bells began ringing in regular shifts, and for the first time, the clock granted hours that did not belong to the boss. But what were they to do with this free time? Now, let's fast forward 200 years. We're in the present, an era in which work fills set hours, yet large blocks of idleness remain, as flexible as they are hollow. Shiny, promising technology assured us that these moments would be gateways to self-development and happiness. But instead, what have we done with our free hours? They've become a swampy terrain of distractions, each one emptier than the last. Today we are all heirs to this modern dilemma. We have everything: free time, unlimited technology, and comfort like humanity has never seen before. Yet a crucial question hangs over us. We are free, but free for what? What will we do with the precious time left after we've met our basic tasks of survival? To understand how we fell into this paradox, having abundant leisure, yet feeling life slip through our fingers, I bring a 20th century philosopher, Richard Taylor, into the conversation. He described with stark clarity the purposeless routine that envelops most people. According to him, most people are, in the most ordinary sense, very limited. They spend their time, day after day, in passive and useless activities, merely watching things, games, television, whatever. Or they fill the hours talking, almost always about nothing significant, about who's coming or going, about who did what, about the weather, about things forgotten almost as quickly as they're mentioned. They have no aspirations beyond simply surviving one more day, doing more or less what they did yesterday. They walk across life's stage, leaving everything exactly as it was when they arrived, accomplishing nothing, aspiring to nothing, never having a single profound or original thought. That is the common, the habitual, the typical, the normal. These words may sound harsh, but they challenge us to confront a troubling problem. Are we living a life or merely existing, passing through the world without leaving a mark, without feeling deeply, without tapping our truest potential? The temptation of passivity is great. After all, we live in fast-paced, exhausting times where rest seems the only logical escape. But rest that neither revitalizes nor transforms or nourishes the soul ends up creating more suffering than relief. Instead of resting, we may be inadvertently diving into the murky waters of anxiety, frustration, and existential emptiness. Throughout history, we won free time as a trophy of modernity. But what do we do with it? Perhaps the answer lies in small stories that carry universal truths, such as that of a man who had everything yet still felt he was losing something he couldn't name. It's on an apparently ordinary midweek afternoon that Ethan, a 28-year-old executive, realizes for the first time that something is wrong in his life. Sitting in his office, surrounded by diplomas, awards, and smiling photos, he stares, perplexed, at his own inability to enjoy what he worked so hard to achieve. The hours he once longed for as rest are now marked by a silent anguish, by the feeling that he is squandering something precious. Ethan realizes how much his seemingly perfect life lacks real meaning. And in that painful moment of clarity, the precise words of philosopher Richard Taylor pierce his mind like an arrow. Many people gravitate from one pleasure or amusement to another, gain a livelihood doing what someone else has assigned, flee boredom as best they can, marry and beget children, and then, without having made the slightest difference of any unique significance, die and decay, like any animal. The impact of these words on Ethan is devastating, because he sees in them a faithful and uncomfortable portrait of himself. Weeks turned into months, months into years, in an endless succession of soulless routine. Trying to flee the pain of reality, Ethan took refuge in social media, endless series, and superficial conversations about trivialities. But something deep within him demanded more, a latent need for expression, creativity, and true fulfillment. Free time, once dreamed of as relief, had become a heavy void that only increased his sense of inadequacy. Ethan was feeling what Colin Wilson had discovered decades earlier in his own struggles. Prolonged inactivity, instead of promoting mental health, tends to generate unhappiness and countless psychological problems. Colin Wilson knew this from firsthand experience. In his youth, he battled severe bouts of depression, noticing that these episodes were always preceded by prolonged phases of passivity. An idle mind is not merely unproductive ground. It's the fertile field where the dangerous seeds of sadness and despair grow. At this very moment, many of us may be living something similar. Anxiety spikes as the phone constantly vibrates, and the discomfort of an empty routine becomes ever more suffocating. It is no longer about resting, but about an emotional inertia that slowly corrodes vital energy. We are, without noticing, allowing our days to become gray, flavorless replicas of one another. The big question then isn't whether we should rest or enjoy our free time, but how we can use it to transcend this vicious cycle. How do we convert boredom into inspiration, emptiness into creation, anxiety into accomplishment? Richard Taylor suggests that the way to break this destructive passivity is to seek what he calls genuine pride. For him, true pride is a love justified by itself, that deep feeling of self-satisfaction that arises from developing exceptional skill in some aspect of life. This doesn't mean only accomplishing great feats recognized worldwide, but dedicating yourself deeply to something meaningful to you. It could be music, art, a social project, a personal venture, or even a skill that only you value. Taylor warns, however, that many confuse this legitimate pride with narcissism, which is nothing more than a shield hiding insecurities and inner dissatisfaction. True pride is neither superficial nor does it seek external applause. It is an internal achievement, solid and enduring. Each of us carries dormant potentials inside. Some may be endowed with exceptional talents, capable of achieving things no one else has ever done. Others may have more subtle gifts, yet equally valuable. Richard Taylor wisely notes, some people, without a doubt, are born destined to be ordinary, to live their lives without significant purpose, but this is relatively rare. Most have the power to be creative, and some possess that power to an almost divine degree. Yet many settle for fleeting, superficial pleasures, drifting through life, avoiding pain, seeking only momentary comfort and social approval. Even though they carry within themselves the ability to accomplish something no one else has done, they prefer the comfortable path, merely repeating what others have already done. So, I ask you, are you living your real potential or merely repeating days in silent passivity? Let's see how this played out in Ethan's story. It was Friday. The clock read exactly 6 p.m., and Ethan felt relieved that another week had come to an end. Inside the office, silence slowly replaced the usual chatter and ringing phones. He adjusted his tie, stood up slowly, and walked to his office window, gazing at the privileged view of the lit-up city, a panorama many would envy. Yet it stirred no special emotion in him. On the contrary, as he watched the lights flicker outside, he felt only a deep, inexplicable emptiness that seemed to grow each week. His life was impeccable to outside eyes, but internally Ethan was constantly invaded by an unsettling sense of wasting something precious, something he perhaps couldn't even name. One day, during an especially dull weekend, Ethan decided to leave the house and wander aimlessly through the city. Amid a cultural fair in a nearby park, he came upon an old stall of used books. His eyes randomly landed on an old volume, its cover worn by time, whose title immediately caught his attention, Restoring Pride, by the philosopher Richard Taylor. Driven by sudden curiosity, he bought the book and began reading it that same afternoon, seated on an isolated bench under the trees. Early on, a passage leaped out and struck him deeply. True pride is love justified by itself. It sounded completely new to him. Taylor explained with cutting clarity that many confuse pride with narcissism, arrogance, or superficial vanity, when in fact legitimate pride arises only when we cultivate real, extraordinary skills worthy of our own admiration. You must cultivate an exceptional skill in some specific domain, achieving personal excellence that clearly distinguishes you from others, the philosopher said, further explaining that this was not necessarily meant for external recognition, but for genuine inner satisfaction. As he read those words, Ethan experienced something rare. A vivid childhood memory rose in his mind. He recalled the afternoons he spent hours building small clay sculptures in his grandmother's backyard. At that time, he felt pure, absolute happiness in creating, simply for the sake of creation itself. But over the years, under constant pressure for professional success and financial security, he had pushed that passion aside, deeming it useless and impractical. There, in that moment, sitting on the park bench, Ethan understood for the first time that perhaps that old joy was the key to filling the void he now felt so deeply. In the weeks that followed, inspired by Taylor's ideas, Ethan returned to clay, devoting his evenings after work to something he had long forgotten. At first he felt clumsy and frustrated at his lack of immediate skill, but he persisted, driven by something stronger, the hope of rescuing himself from the emotional inertia in which he had lived these past years. Each imperfect sculpture and each frustrated attempt became a firm step toward authentic personal fulfillment. He realized he wasn't seeking technical perfection, but the deep satisfaction of truly dedicating himself to something meaningful and personal. Exactly as Taylor had described, to have the kind of love that is justified by the kind of person you become. Ethan's transformation was silent yet intense. Coworkers began to notice something different about him, perhaps more lightness in his expression or a new sparkle in his eyes. He, however, knew the reason. Now, instead of fearing free hours as empty, purposeless moments, he saw them as precious opportunities to explore his potential, to challenge himself, to live fully. Taylor also mentioned something profound and controversial in his book. Many confuse equal rights with equal worth. Just because everyone shares equal natural rights doesn't mean everyone has the same merit or personal value. The ancient Greeks knew this well. While the majority live merely to fit into the crowd, a minority pursue exceptional virtues, accomplish remarkable works, and follow their own paths regardless of external approval. Rather than bothering him, this statement clarified for Ethan the real value of his personal journey. It wasn't superiority over others that he sought, but authenticity and inner integrity. He now desired a life consistent with himself, filled with genuine passion and real pride. Not empty pride, but the kind born of consistent actions, of true effort, and the courage to stay true to himself. Taylor clearly synthesized this view by stating that most people prefer the easy comfort of reproducing what others have done before, even while harboring within themselves the potential to achieve something unique, perhaps something no one has ever done before. Creating something original, doing it well, regardless of external appreciation, is what truly means to be human, and only that justifies true self-love, which we call pride. Ethan finally understood that the problem was never free time itself, but how he used it. He discovered he could fill his free hours not with passive distractions, but with a real, active, creative passion. Little by little, that silent, unsettling feeling that followed him daily began to fade, giving way to deep peace and authentic personal satisfaction. He didn't have to quit his job or radically change his life. He only had to recognize that his free time was extremely valuable, a space to express his true essence and live fully. Ethan realized at last that the true meaning of life lies precisely in this commitment to his genuine passion. For a long time, Ethan hadn't understood that the restlessness he felt wasn't a defect or a sign of weakness, but an urgent call to change. He'd found in sculpture not just a hobby, but the key to a full life. Yet his story was not isolated. Thousands, perhaps millions of people were silently trapped in the same modern void, a kind of diffuse malaise, unable to name exactly what they lacked. Richard Taylor clarifies this with deep precision. many people accept living without significant purpose, contenting themselves with small distractions and superficial pleasures, even though they carry within them the potential to do something unique. Perhaps something no other human being has ever done. Following well-worn paths is safe and comfortable. However, creating something truly original, regardless of external appreciation, is what it means to be fully human. Only that justifies true self-love, which we call pride. Ethan's path was neither simple nor easy, for breaking with a passive, comfortable routine requires real courage. With every new sculpture that emerged from his hands, a part of the emptiness disappeared. He learned that rest, so prized in our exhausting times, isn't bad in itself, but it becomes harmful when it is lived as an escape from life, as constant anesthesia for existential discomfort. Colin Wilson warned clearly about this in his autobiography. Since youth, he had noticed that his most acute phases of depression were always preceded by prolonged periods of passivity. According to Wilson, the idle mind is a dangerous workshop where anxiety, pessimism, and the deepest despair thrive. Ethan now fully acknowledged this truth, for he experienced firsthand how active commitment to something meaningful shielded his mind from the weight of apathy. This journey had also taught Ethan an important lesson. It wasn't necessary to become famous or amass extraordinary wealth to live fully. Philosopher Richard Taylor emphasized that true pride, love justified by itself, doesn't depend on external recognition, but is born from the genuine satisfaction of knowing oneself capable of something meaningful and authentic. And there lay the central point. Every one of us, without exception, has somewhere inside us a unique spark waiting to be awakened. Perhaps you like to write, sing, paint, teach, cook, or even tend a garden. The important thing isn't the activity you choose, but how deeply you commit to it, allowing it to give real meaning to your free time. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is still searching, so don't stop here. In the video on your left, we explore how Nietzsche believed your true passion isn't something you choose, it's something that chooses you. You'll learn how to recognize it and why ignoring it might be the greatest risk of all. And on the right, a powerful story. It follows a man who spent years hiding behind routines, expectations, and silence, until one day, his soul could no longer stay quiet. If you've ever felt like you're living a life that isn't truly yours, that video is for you. Choose one, or watch both, but whatever you do, keep going.